It's time to talk to an old friend, Stephen Hunter. Of course, the Pulitzer Prize winning author of the Bob Lee Swagger novels. He's got a new novel out. It's called Targeted. Makes fun of a couple of people in Washington you might well recognize. Bob Lee finds himself run afoul of the federal government again. Let's talk about the new book, Targeted. It's a Bob Lee Swagger book, but it's a Bob Lee book that is a little different than many of the others that you've written. Why don't you give me the inevitable elevator speech that I know you've given 1,000 times since the book came out? Tell me what this book is.
Well, let's start with what prompted it. And what's always annoyed me, it's a regular ceremony in our culture. Most recently seen in the Kim Potter incident in Wisconsin, and this occurs when people of inaction judge people of action for something they've done in action about which the people in action know nothing. That's always struck me as an appalling moral catastrophe. And so I decided to take Bob Lee Swagger and put him in legal jeopardy for having done the right thing. And I was interested in the way these episodes are perceived. I was interested in the way they're used for political gain. I was interested in the whole process of examination and adjudication. In my case, I followed directly from Game of Snipers, and I had Bob brought to before a hearing, a House hearing, field hearing in Boise, Idaho, on the shot he took on Juba the sniper in Game of Snipers, and I wanted him to engage in blood sport dialogue with various people who felt they knew what he should have done as opposed to what he did do. This on the basis, as I say, of nothing. And what I wanted to do was then reverse the situation. And suddenly they have no power, and they desperately, fanatically, obsessively, pathetically need him to survive. And that illustrates, to me at least, the way people feel about the deployment of force in our country. We don't want the cops until we have someone in our house. Then we want the cops. The same thing is, we don't want a gun in the house until someone breaks in. Then we want a gun in the house. And I wanted to look at that hypocrisy. And I wanted also to have fun with some personalities who are very vivid in the current political scene, whom who both fascinate me and appall me. And so I have portraits of a couple of well-known politicians in there, not portraits, satirical exaggerations of them. I put that in strictly for laughs. You know what? I think this book, among other things, it's one of its virtues is it's pretty damn funny. And I had great fun doing the funny parts. As I get older, funny seems a lot more important than it used to seem. I don't know why that is. Funny is always good, okay? So I had fun writing it, and it seemed that I'm glad it's out. Let's put it this way. There were lots of issues along the way. As you know, I included a backstory of origins, where the Bob Lee Swagger family comes from, where the genetic information that enables them to shoot, not all of them, but most of them at this extraordinary level, where it comes from, to give it some source, some reality in history. And I had great fun doing that as well. That's based, to be honest with you, it's based on a novel that I wrote years and years ago. I never wrote it, that I tried to sell years and years ago. And I was told it was set in the Revolutionary War. And I was told that as a commercial proposition, the Revolutionary War is dead as a donut. So this way, I managed to get enough of it in there to satisfy me. Plus, and the last thing, I love sword fights. I grew up watching Errol Flynn movies. I just really enjoy sword fights in movies. And I've had one good sword fight in my Japanese book, but I've had in my this ideal image of a sword fight to the death in the rain in the mud with two guys fighting a Florentine, which means they have a sword in each hand, a long sword and a short sword. It was a dueling technique of the 18th century, and so I managed to build the book to in such a way as to include that. And some people get it, some people don't. Some if you're charitably inclined towards that sort of thing, you will find this fabulous. If you're not, you won't. That's just the deal with me. If this is the thing you like, this is the thing you like. If not, bye. No hard feelings, okay? And
Well, you know, the book read like you had fun writing it. I mean, you can kind of feel that in a book when it seems like the author is actually, in some cases, playing with it, playing with the plot, and playing with the way the words sound and the words come together. And I really had a sense in Targeted that's where you were. This was a fun book for you to write.
it was a very much a fun book for me to write, and it was indeed. There's a I hope a spirit of play in it that people will get in response to. That's not to say that when it turns serious, it doesn't. You know, it turns really serious. But there's also a sense of mischievousness to it, a sense of surprise to it. You know, it's as I've described it elsewhere as a satire with machine guns, and you know, I want both those components, and they both please me. And of course, the trick is to get the balances, the proportions right. It took several tries. There were several mistakes. How to integrate some of these aspects together. I believe that I brought it off, though your mileage may vary. It's just it was a book I needed to write. I needed to get it out of my system. I've actually had something like it in mind for a long, long time, and I finally got to do it. For years and years I wanted to write a book called The Trial of Bob Lee Swagger. Couldn't figure out how to do it. I had a dozen different plans, all of which I eventually realized were stupid, and I kept coming up with gambits, with scenarios, with milieus, with possibilities to put Bob on trial and make him defend himself in words that which he had done with lead. And finally, this sort of came together for me in a certain in the way it is now constructed, and I believe I finally found its ideal form.
You know, I think you did. And one thing I thought was really interesting is if you go back several books, a few books back, you were one of the first fiction authors popular within this culture, within the gun culture, if you will, who talked about the idea of narrative. Because until you started talking about it in your books, I think all of us sort of instinctively thought about, well, the narrative is more important than the truth, the facts, or anything. But I remember you specifically writing just a short paragraph on the narrative drives everything in news in Washington, D.C. And it really brought that to clarity to me. I remember quoting that particular phrase on the internet where it said, this is how it works, because Steve is there. I mean, Steve is the insider's insider. He's there. He's been in Washington. He understands how this works. And in Targeted, I saw you do exactly the same thing with House hearings to really show them for what they are, which is a shooting gallery, if you will, for the person sitting in the seat.
Yeah, it's a terrible system. I wish I could think of a better one. I can't. But indeed, the hearing process. Maybe we're going to discover this anew when they go into July 6th. The hearing process is inherently unfair, and it's inherently political, and it's protected via the rights and privileges of Congress in a way that make it almost unassailable. And it has been misused in American culture, I'm sorry, in American society for 2.5 centuries. And I don't see anything on the future other than nuclear annihilation that's going to change that. And I mean, you could pick any period in history, and there's always some junior congressman from, you know, Southern California who sees a way to make a name for himself by running a hearing that is guaranteed to primarily spotlight him. And the system is set up so that he has all the advantages. He can cut off his opponents, he can shape them, he can end their ability to respond to him, he can make all kinds of funny faces, and he can be funny, but of course they can't be funny. Uh, they can go to prison for contempt of Congress, but he can't go to prison for contempt of citizen. And again, it's a great American blood sport. I don't like it, but I don't. It's not like I'm calling for the system to be torn down and replaced, uh, because show trials are just sort of a feature of government agenda, and whether they're put on by Stalin or by Hitler or by this or that American president for political gain, they're just a feature of politics, that a tool of politics, if you will, that cannot be. It's just it's just a part of human behavior, and the only real defense against it is satire. And so that's my job, is to make fun of it, and I hope I've done a good job of it. And I hope people laugh at some of my characterizations of some of the people involved, and the sort of the underlying cynicism and contempt that makes that sort of fuels this process. And that was just, as I say, it was fun. Getting stuff off your chest is always fun. That's another human behavioral characteristic that'll never go away.
And novelists always have the last laugh.
Well, that's
You've
true.
got the last laugh.
I think so. I think I won this one. I may suddenly find all my taxes, under dispute by IRS, but maybe it was worth it. We'll see.
Speaking of somebody who's been targeted and dinged by the feds, it's never very much fun. I can
No, I bet
assure
it's
you.
not.
But what's interesting too is your decision is as you go through the years. Bob Lee gets older, and that isn't a decision that other novelists with characters, repeating characters that they've written about for years. Oftentimes, they're in amber. They stay kind of the same age as they were in the first book.
Yes, that's very true. It is characteristic of my books, and I get a lot of attention on that aspect and some praise for it. And yet, it wasn't anything that I thought about seriously. It's just that to some minor degree, he is a reflection of me. He has bad hips. I have bad hips. He's old. I'm old. He has to rest between flights of steps. I have to rest between flights of steps. It was the way it was. First off, it's a commentary on the fact that you really do draw a lot of this stuff, even with a character as far from me as Swagger. You draw a lot of it from yourself, from your own plant, your own physical existence, or at least I do. That happens to be my peculiarity as a writer. And secondly, it also shows the degree to which I'm a total amateur at this business. It would have made more sense to keep him eternally 35, but it never occurred to me to do that. At this point in my life, 40 years beyond 35, I have no memory of what being 35 feels like. I don't know what a life without bad joints would be. I don't know what a life without continually forgetting where the keys are. I can't begin to. I can't begin to imagine a life where you always know where your car keys are. That's to me, that's totally baffling. That's like science fiction. And so, it's just sort of the natural process of the way I work that I've made that decision. And I take pride in the fact that I am the only thriller author whose hero fell out of a tree. Jack Reacher and John Reese and George Smiley and any character in the literature on back to Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes never fell out of a tree, but Bob Lee Swagger fell out of a tree, and I'm actually, you know, I like that. I that's one of the sort of minor sub themes of these books is the reality of aging and what you can and can't do. And he can do a lot more. Well, let's put it this way: you believe you can do a lot more than you can really do, and it's just been fun to sort of get that into him. It's been fun to be that.
Well, you can almost see within it the sense of there's that meme that you get to a point where your mind makes bets that your body can't deliver on.
That's
And
exactly a very good way of putting it. Yeah.
and you see that in as Bob Lee ages, you actually see that in him, that he occasionally makes bets that really he can no longer deliver on, but he can certainly do a good job of trying.
Well, one of the good things about our discipline shooting is that even the old can shoot well. And he's not going to kick down any doors, or he's not going to do much more parachute work or any dark of night sentry throat slitting. But he is, if it comes to the shooting aspects of it, he will shoot well and hit his target. And that talent is it's perdurable. It's part of him. It's part of his DNA. I've sort of linked it in this book to genetics. I believe it is partially genetic. It's like it's primarily an athletic talent, and athletic talents are heritable, and that is uh, uh, that's a truth that I want to get into the books, and and finding ways to do that has been lots of fun for me. Finding out who his predecessors were, and what is the origin of his and his family's occasional generation of great talent has was fun for me. And I've been for a number of books I've been teasing the arrival of this mystery couple to Arkansas in 1780 under the name Swagger, which is where it seemingly all began. We don't know who they are and where they came from and what circumstances put them at that particular point, at that particular time, and started the Swagger history. And this book, I've known the answer for many years, but this book gives you that answer. And figuring out a way to get that into the story was great fun. Again, I'm, I'm at an age now where I'm not going to write these books unless they're fun. I'm not going to write them, you know, for moral purposes or commercial purposes. It's too much work to do without really getting a kick out of it every night. So I'm going to construct them in such a way that I'm always getting a kick out of them.
And I think the readers appreciate that. I think
Well,
it's
I hope
important
so.
to know that.
I
You
hope.
got a great review on this book from Newt Gingrich. That was a really pretty spectacular review.
Newt has been very good to me. In fact, I'm going to do his podcast very shortly, and I've done it before. And I mean, he is a guy who gets it because he's a historian and he is also a firearms rights guy. So he's like perfectly constructed to to appreciate what I'm trying to do. Others not so much, but that's just the reality of the marketplace. And I know that his enthusiasm will count for a lot with essentially my typical readership. Maybe it'll hurt me in some places. Who knows? Who cares? Let's just let's just do it and see what happens next.
I've always said that my favorite review on my one single novel was one that started out. The reviewer said, "As a writer myself, I have standards, lines that I will not cross. Mr. Bain crossed them on page 14 and apparently never looked back." And I thought, that's a dream review.
Oh, that you couldn't ask for more than that. Well, he could have said page 8, I suppose. That would have been more,
Yeah.
more flattering. But yeah, I just recently got it was fundamentally positive. It was regretfully, sadly, semi-positive in, of all places, the New York Times book review. The woman, she felt dirty to buy it. You know, she felt tainted by it. I imagine she got in a hot bubble bath after reading it and spent the next 4 hours there. But she semi acknowledged that she enjoyed it, although I don't, it was clear to me that she hadn't read it very carefully, but then they never do. And you can't expect them to, and you can't get your drawers all in a wad because they don't. So I just take what I get with, I hope, grace and good humor. And I thank her and the New York Times, even though they weren't exactly, ringing bells and blowing whistles. They were at least marginally respectful and appreciative.
Well, that's something given the strange state of the country these days. Is I often talk about looking back on those wonderful good old days, Christmas 2019, when a whole lot of things we absolutely totally believe were true were apparently still true and are now no longer operative.
They
It is
changed
odd
everything.
times. Yeah.
Physics, for example, no longer operates, nor does biology. Who knew?
I know I'm pretty sure neither you nor I will be getting pregnant, but
Yeah,
at least we have the icon for it on Apple.
exactly. Exactly.
So it's a question I've asked you over the years, but I've watched the character, the swaggers, have become sort of beloved characters within this culture, within the gun culture. It's an interesting phenomenon. Is that from when you started, if you go all the way back to Point of Impact, it was first people going like, "Wow, there's somebody who gets it," and now after all these years, it's with I just came back from SHOT Show, and so you're at SHOT Show, and people sort of refer to the Bob Lee books with as if they are referring to beloved relatives, if that makes sense. It's
Well,
you,
that does seem to have happened. Although I have to tell you, that was never a goal. I had no idea when I wrote the first Bob Lee Swagger book, which was mainly in I guess, the early '90s, that it would become a 20 novel odyssey, a trek, a a life's work. It's just that each book raised more questions than it's answered, or I came up with situations that only a swagger could deal with that engaged me, and somehow the whole thing happened without a lot of planning on my part. It just seemed logical. It seemed a way to go. It was always, as I say, it was always enjoyable. And at a certain point, I had decided I wasn't going to do these things if they weren't fun. And every single one of them was fun. I mean, some of them are somewhat tortured in that I wanted to write a book about the Eastern Front. And the only way I could do that was write that book, but weave a Bob Lee Swagger story into it. And again, I did the best I could. Many people approved, some people didn't, but it just was. It took the book, it made the book somewhat weird, but nevertheless, as it just was a very sort of enlightening situation. I did the same thing with the Kennedy assassination. I'd had a Kennedy assassination book that I wanted to write. Suddenly it occurred to me that Bob Lee Swagger could be involved in the investigation. And so I wrote that book. And again, extremely satisfying to me. And if readers approved and endorsed, so much the better. But the reader acceptance was more candy than it was substance. It was pleasant, but that wasn't the point. The point was to do this thing and get certain ideas out there. I indulged in my fondness for Japanese movies and samurai sword fights, and somehow I managed to accommodate the Bob Lee Swagger world to that. And again, what these books are sort of a chronicle, among other things, of the various obsessions that have gripped me over the years, and where I really get into something and I build up a great deal of energy and eagerness, and I need that to do the work. I need that sort of propulsion in order to do the work, and I can't. Without that, I can't. Without that eagerness, I just can't. I just can't proceed. You just there's not enough fuel left in the tank to write a book that you have to write because you've taken money. The trick is to trick them into letting you write the books you want to write under the guise, the delusion that you're writing the books that they want you to write. And that's sort of what my career has been about. Sort of, what can we put over on them this time? And I'm still here. I published my first book in 1980, so it's been 42 years, and there still seems to be a demand. And lasting 42 years is something that not that some, but not many writers manage to do.
I will say that one of the most fun evenings I ever had, and an evening where I actually kept my mouth shut more than open, was dinner with you and Gary James from Guns and Ammo, because it was a dinner that bounced between guns, movies, and favorite scenes in old musicals, which is not where I would have expected the conversation to go. But in fact, it went there, and it was absolutely fascinating. You
Gary,
were,
a great guy. He actually descends from Hollywood. His parents were both actors in the golden age, and through Gary's auspices, I received something that is very dear to me, which is an actual Fred Astaire autograph. I happen to love Fred Astaire. I think Fred Astaire proves the existence of God. I mean, no other phenomenon, no, there's nothing else in reality or in existence that explains Fred Astaire. And he was such a anyway, Gary's parents knew him and actually exchanged Christmas gifts with him. And Gary also loves movies. And in certain areas, Gary knew a lot more than I did about certain kinds and certain places of movies. And he's a wonderful, extremely knowledgeable man. He's just a very good guy, and I'm so pleased to count him among my friends. And one of which gets me to one of the great pleasures of my career has been the people it's let me to meet. Not you, but other
oh,
people.
well.
No. You know Michael Bain, but I've also met uh, Jack Carr. I've met Masad Ayub. I've met many of the great gun writers. I've just gone to shot shows, and it's just been, as I say, it's just been a very provocative and fun time. Good way to spend 75 years, believe me.
And on that note, I think I'll maybe let you go because, as you
Oh,
know, I have a history of when I'm interviewing you, of driving you into the ground. I've done that more than once over the years. But as always, thank you. Thank you for for your talent, and they're books I love to read, and I think almost I speak for an awful lot of people within the culture when I say, like, a book from you comes out and you're like, wow, finally, as opposed to most of what comes out.
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Michael. I'm so pleased with your enthusiasm and your support over the years. It's meant a great deal to me.